Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I feel like it looks especially messy, and I apologize for that. We are going to be continuing our discussion about Dead Like Me, and we are going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 3. This episode is called Ghost Stories. So it has been a hot minute since I filmed these. I put in the explanation for the first episode of Season 2 that I really would like to try to get this series done on Halloween. So I'm planning on releasing one episode each week, and then once we get to Halloween, it'll be right there for the finale. But anyway, we're gonna talk about ghost stories. So in the comments, I'm actually going to link an article that I read as I was doing just a little bit of research. On this episode, I came across a blog that somebody had written each one of the episodes down in a review fashion, and they had some really insightful thoughts that if you are interested in this show, which I'm assuming you are since you're watching this, that you might be interested in this person's thoughts too. The author of this particular blog that I read pointed out that this episode really focuses on how each character deals with loneliness, with the exception of Rube, and how the title is actually really clever because they're all ghosts in their own way, and their way that they cope with loneliness is highlighted here, and that is something that I will be considering as I'm talking about this. The episode opens up with George rehashing a story that Rube tells in the end of the episode, and I really love this whole thing that season 2 is doing where they're really bookending parts of the season. And George talks about this story of this man who ends up at this swamp, and he needs to decide if he's gonna go around or through the swamp. And he meets a young boy, and he asks the boy if the swamp has a hard bottom, and the boy says it does. The man goes through the swamp and he starts sinking, and he asks the boy, "I thought you said that it had a hard bottom." And the boy says, "It does. You're just not there yet." And this is a really interesting metaphor because throughout the entire episode we see the characters struggling through their decisions and their actions and going through that swamp and getting kind of sucked down into their actions. Millie's doing great at work. She's got a promotion. She's doing well with Dolores. Dolores is really feeling her vibe, but Dolores is really not loving how antisocial Millie is, and she invites her to the retreat, which Millie is not about at all. And a lot of her coworkers are really excited, and having worked several jobs where there's a lot of these team building exercises, they're kind of BS and they're really actually terrible. So I can't honestly blame George for not wanting to go and hang out with her office cohorts, because most of the time you don't even want to hang out with the people that you work with while you're at work, let alone at a non-work function. But Dolores does make a good point that Millie has no photos of her family. She has no connections, that she's basically a real person. And this causes George to start to analyze how she's doing things. She analyzes how she's always been like this, how she's always kind of been an outcast and living on the fringes. And she makes a really lovely commentary later that she's always criticizing from the fringes and staying there and never letting herself be a part of the group. And we kind of saw this in the first season, and we saw points where George was kind of like, this is the way that I do life, but maybe this is not the way that it works, and maybe I should try a different approach. So in that sense, George is constantly going back and forth with this who she is, who she was, who she wants to be. She does tell Rube and the rest of the group that it's not that she wants to fit in with them, she just doesn't want to stand out, because standing out is causing this scene, and maybe it's attracting too much attention to the fact that she's not like the rest of them. She is undead. In Der Waffle House, I want to bring this up because it's the first and last time we ever see this. There's a Waffle House club card. All the Reapers, with the exception of George, have participated in this, and basically they get their cards punched and they'll get a free waffle after a certain amount. Each Reaper is at a certain amount, but then it reveals that Daisy is one, or Daisy's next one is gonna be a free waffle, and so everyone kind of looks at her like, what's going on with that? And so it kind of leaves us to speculate, has Daisy been going in after the group meetings and ordering waffles and just like hanging out and gorging on them? Because that's how it makes it seem. So back at Happy Time, I want to focus on George and then I'll kind of go each character. So there is this facilitator of the retreat. His name is Greg. He totally seems like one of those guys that puts on this air of positivity, but he actually is like a closet angry alcoholic. George eventually convinces herself that she's gonna go on this retreat, and Rube is like, I need to know where you're gonna go because you're on call, and if something happens, you're gonna be there to do your job. So she goes on the retreat, she drives up with Dolores, and at this retreat they end up doing this lame team building exercise where they all have to talk about what type of animal they are. And Millie is really just sitting there judging every single person, making snide comments, which are not inaccurate comments, but maybe comments that shouldn't be said to people that you are going to be sharing an office space with in just a few short days. You know, you don't want to create too much animosity at a work function. And so she ends up getting called to explain what animal she is, which she doesn't really want to, and she says she's not an animal, but she starts to analyze herself and realizes that she's doing it again, where she's pushing people away. And earlier in the episode, Dolores even commented that Millie uses sarcasm and humor to push people away and to throw up walls, and Georgia doesn't want to do that anymore. So she starts by kind of dipping her Millie toe into the water to kind of make her way and start blossoming outwards. So she tells everyone that she is this feral black cat. She's got a lot of lives, and she just is kind of angry and not a cat that you would want to like pet and be nice to. This is a pretty accurate description of who Georgia is as a character. She's definitely a cat who doesn't want to be pet. And then Rube shows up and has a reap for her. She ends up getting this reap, and while she's away, Rube is invited by Dolores to share a ghost story. And this is where one of my favorite moments happens, because when Rube shows up, Dolores asks him again about his name, and you know, he says that it's just Rube plain. And she goes, oh, like Cher. And he says, more like Houdini. And then she says, wow, Houdini, wouldn't it have been great to have met him? And that was one of my favorite moments, I think, of all time. At this retreat, Rube tells this ghost story, and he tells the same story that Georgia told at the top of the episode of this man who got into a fight with his wife, and he left. And she said, if you don't come back in 3 days, then I'm out. And I'm gonna hit it, so bye. Be back if you wanna make things work. And so the man on the third day realizes he kind of messed up, so he wants to go back. And he gets to a swamp, and he needs to decide if he's gonna go around it or through it. And same situation as the beginning of the story, he meets someone who tells him it has a hard bottom. He gets into it, and he starts to sink, and the story ends. And there's parts of it that feel like a Rube-esque ghost story. You know, he's got a lot of stories that he likes to tell, but also, as we'll learn later on down the road and into Rube's backstory, we do find out that he possibly robbed a bank and may have gotten killed in the process. So I do sort of wonder if this story that he told did have some truth to it, that maybe he and his wife were fighting over not having enough money. Rube left, robbed a bank, and went to go back to his family, and something happened to him along the way. And from his choices, he got sucked down into that swamp. We know that Rube obviously didn't get arrested by the police, otherwise he wouldn't be where he's at now. He would have been in a jail and would have died in prison or something. So we are left to believe that this might be an anecdote for his journey and the choices that he made, which is why Rube kind of just doesn't let anything bother him anymore. He already dealt with the worst thing possible, right? And then we'll talk about the last family. So Reggie and Joy are doing their thing. Joy is really meticulously and compulsively trying to keep her fingers in all the pies. She's trying to sell the house. She's trying to make some money because Clancy's certainly not gonna help out. So she's doing what she can, and she's alone in this, doing this process all by herself. She arranged for a realtor to bring a couple in, and she meticulously set up the house the day before. It really shows Joy's compulsion as a character and how she really has this need to really keep everything tight, because we get this impression that Clancy just lives his life like a balloon, just floating away. He has no cares, no worries. He pushes everybody away because he doesn't really care. And because that lack of control, so to speak, that Clancy has, Joy feels this need to control everything. And maybe that's why she also pushed away Georgia. And she's starting to push away Reggie by not listening to Reggie's needs. So this couple comes and they're very interested in the house, but Reggie is doing everything in her power to make them not want to buy it, including telling a creepy story about how Georgia comes back and checks on them even though she's dead. And at one point she tells this, I'm gonna say he's kind of creepy, husband, whose name is Andy, she tells him, I don't think you should move here. And I think what it really gets at is that she doesn't want to leave because she knows that George comes back. She knows that George checks on them. We see her all the time looking out the window or kind of being aware that George might be the one that's calling. And we kind of see these glimpses that Reggie has a clue of what's going on. And I think she doesn't want George to get confused and not know which house to go back to. But I will say, Andy is a very strange, odd character. And the scene where he is like, I'm gonna go back in, and goes to talk to Reggie alone in the living room and is really interested in George, it was kind of strange. It was kind of giving me weird, pervy vibes, but whatever. And then we'll move to Mason and to Daisy, who are gonna get lumped together in this one because Mason loses his Post-it. And we get to see the mousetrap, so to speak, of how that Post-it floats away and gets to the intended target of that Post-it, which is something we haven't seen before. And this woman finds her Post-it, she looks at it, she sees her name, she sees the time, and she's very confused. She goes to the location and tries to figure out what the heck is, why her name is on a Post-it, and why there's a time listed next to it. Rightfully so, it's kind of a strange situation. So Mason recruits Daisy to help him. They go and they break into Rube's flat, and Mason ends up drinking a bunch of his booze, and they dance and they have fun. And Daisy has this really vulnerable moment with him where she reveals that she watches him. And it doesn't come off in like a romantic way, but it's very much a friendly, could potentially blossom into something else type of a way. And it's nice to see Daisy less prickly, because normally we see her so just like claws out all the time. And she's really turning a corner into a good direction, I think. And especially with Mason, she's treating him differently. And she is like, I know that you know where your reap is and where you're supposed to go and who it is, because you want to know you're a good, caring person. Which Mason's like, you're right, I do know. And he leaves and he goes to get his reap. And this is where the episode kind of gets strange, because he finds his reap and she's at what appears to be some type of art gallery. And when I paused on the screen, it said something gallery, and inside the room were a bunch of paintings, and there's this night security guard who's sitting at the desk, and he goes to open up the door, and she's like, why is my name on this Post-it? But then this little boy, less than 10, maybe he's a pet reaper, went and tried to take her purse. So for some reason, this night guard has a gun, chases them down the alley, and tries to shoot at the child. And I have numerous questions, because this is not the police. This is some type of night security guard for an art gallery. Why does a night security guard have a gun? And two, why would he be just shooting at a child who just stole a purse? It seems like such a rash action when you could just call the cops and be like, hey, there's been a mugging. It gets a little weird, but George's reap also involves a guy getting killed with a shotgun. And it's kind of interesting because there's two murders that both happened by guns, and I wonder if there was some type of clunky gun commentary they were trying to make and it just didn't end up working out, or maybe they didn't get to flesh it out. Or maybe it was just a coincidence and they were like, hey, we killed one guy with a shotgun, let's kill another one with a pistol. So, a little funny. A couple last things I want to point out. Tiffany, near the middle of the episode when Mason is looking for his Post-it, he asks her if she's seen anything, and she fully acknowledges that she knows that the group is playing with Post-its, but she doesn't quite know what they're doing or why they're important. And so it kind of further leads me to believe that Tiffany knows a little bit about the Reapers and she just chooses not to acknowledge it, especially knowing from a later episode that she is kind of psychic. It does make me wonder how much she's just kind of playing dumb for Mason and the group. Like, I don't know what you're doing playing with your post-it notes, even though she kind of does. The second thing is that during the campfire scene where Rube is telling the story, it's just such a good moment, but it is so good because Mandy Patinkin is such a fantastic actor and he's so compelling. I believe everything that he's saying, and his conviction is so good. He should be doing every single role because he's so good. So my favorite quote from this episode is from near the top of the episode, and it's when Dolores and Millie are talking about the retreat, and Millie's like, why do we have to retreat at all? Who's attacking us? And it's a fun little play on words, you know, retreat as in leaving and doing a getaway, and retreating from an attack. I feel like there weren't a lot of things that were super quotable other than Cher, Houdini, which it's cute, but it's such a long one. But I feel like what this episode really does a good job at is highlighting the characters and kind of giving us deeper moments with them. And like the author of the blog that I'm gonna link below pointed out, we get to see how each one of them deals with loneliness and how Georgia really regrets the way that she has treated other people, and how retreating into herself hasn't really worked, and how Roxy is always just a lone wolf. She's always just doing her own thing. She gets her post-it and she goes. And Daisy, who's an especially lonely character, is finally reaching out to Mason to kind of let him in. And we even see that with Joy, who is handling everything on her own. And her response to loneliness is to be compulsive. And with Reggie, her response to being lonely is to just kind of emulate what her sister did, because it must have worked so well for George, it would work for her too. So this was a very good episode. And I will say the next one is not my favorite. I think it's actually probably my least favorite in the entire franchise. And I couldn't tell you why. Maybe once I actually start taking some notes, maybe once I take some notes on the episode, I'll understand why, but fair warning, next one is not my favorite. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are about this episode in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.